Let's start with a puzzle. What if I told you that in farming, one of our most ancient industries, bigger isn't always better? We're about to dive into a fascinating economic mystery from 1960s India that flipped a lot of assumptions on their head. And it all boils down to one simple question.
So, think about it for a second. Your gut probably tells you the large farm, right? I mean, it just makes sense. They've got the huge tractors, the technology, economies of scale, all that good stuff. They should be more efficient. But what if the data told a completely different story?
Yep, you heard that right. When economists actually looked at the numbers, they found that acre for acre, the tiniest family plots were actually outproducing the massive mechanized farms. Now, this made absolutely no sense according to traditional economics, and it kicked off a huge debate that lasted for decades, trying to figure out why. So, this strange phenomenon actually got a name. Economists called it the inverse relationship. And it's a really simple but powerful idea. As the size of a farm goes up, the amount of stuff you get from each acre of land actually goes down. The data on this was just incredibly clear. Just take a look at this table. It's based on some really groundbreaking work by the famous economist Amartya Sen back in 1962. And it shows you exactly what researchers were seeing. This wasn't just a fluke. All across India, the data kept showing the same thing. The very smallest farms, we're talking under 2.5 acres, were the most productive per unit of land. The question that stumped everyone was, how? Well, as economists dug in, they realized the answer wasn't really about the physical size of the farm. The key, it turns out, was all about the system of labor being used. So what do you think it is? What's the one thing a small family has tons of, even if they don't have a lot of cash or fancy machines? The answer is their own labor, their own time and effort. Okay, this slide really gets to the core of it. A big capitalist farm runs like any other business. They pay workers a market wage, and they'll only use that labor as long as it's profitable. But a family farm, it runs on a totally different logic. It's not that their labor is worthless, it's that there aren't many other paying jobs. They aren't clocking in and out or calculating an hourly wage for themselves. They're just trying to squeeze every last bit of food and value out of that land so they can survive. You know, it's kind of like a DIY project at your house. You might spend your entire weekend weeding your garden by hand. You're not thinking, am I paying myself 20 bucks an hour for this? Of course not. You just put in the hours because it needs to be done. Well, the small farmer applies that same exact logic to their whole life, pouring in an incredible amount of work that a big farm, paying by the hour, would just say is not profitable. And all that extra effort, that's what drives the yield per acre through the roof. And we have to be really clear about what's going on here. This isn't some romantic story about the simple life. As Sen and Rudra wrote, this incredible work ethic comes from a place of necessity. It's a reflection of the harsh reality that, for these farmers, getting the absolute most from their land is a matter of survival. So, case closed, right? Small farms are just better. Well, this is where our story gets another really fascinating twist, thanks to another economist, Ashok Rudra. Right when everybody was starting to accept this inverse relationship as a fact of life, Rudra decided to go back and take a much, much closer look at the raw numbers. So in 1968, Rudra went back to those same surveys, but he looked deeper. He looked at the data from individual farms, not just big regional averages. And what he discovered showed that the simple story wasn't the whole story. The reality was way more complex, and it kicked off a whole new debate. So here's the crucial point Rudra made, this inverse relationship. It's a real and important pattern, but it's not some rigid universal law. It was really strong in some parts of India, but in other places, it basically disappeared. And sometimes a big farm's access to capital, things like fertilizer, irrigation, better seeds, was enough to completely wipe out the small farm's labor advantage. Now, you can imagine this wasn't just some dusty academic argument. This whole debate had huge, real-world consequences. It forced policymakers to face a really difficult choice about the entire future of their country's food system. The choice seemed to be between two flawed models. On one side, you have small-scale peasant farming. It's fantastic at using the one thing a poor country has a lot of, people's labor. But it's really bad at getting the money for big improvements. On the other side, you have large-scale capitalist farming. It's great at using money and technology, but it can be less efficient with labor and could create a huge class of landless, insecure workers. So this is the trap policymakers were in. They could support small farms and get the most out of their country's biggest resource, its people. Or they could go all in on large farms to maximize technology and capital. It really seemed like you couldn't have both. But what if that choice between peasant farming and capitalist farming was the wrong choice to begin with? What if there was a third option that everyone was just overlooking? Sen and Ruda absolutely thought there was. They started asking, is there a system out there that could combine the intense, careful labor of the family farm with the scale and financial power of a huge enterprise? And the answer they proposed was cooperative farming. In this model, lots of small farmers would basically team up. They'd pull their land and their resources, work together as one big farm, but, and this is the important part, they'd still be working for themselves, sharing in the profits. The potential here is pretty amazing if you think about it. You get to keep that intense work ethic of a family farm because everyone's a co-owner working for their own benefit. But now you're big enough to make major investments, like building a new irrigation canal or buying modern equipment. It offers a path to way more security than just being a hired hand. And here's the final twist. By 1980, when Sen and Ruthra were looking back at this whole debate, they noticed something startling. The discussion had gotten so black and white, so stuck on small farms versus big farms, that this third alternative, the cooperative model, had basically vanished from the conversation entirely. And that leaves us with a really powerful question for today. As we have our own big debates about the future of food, local versus industrial, organic versus conventional, this story from 1960s India is an amazing reminder to think outside the box. It makes you wonder, what promising solutions, what third alternatives might we be overlooking just because our debates have become too narrow?